Yeah, well, if you'd have called, I would have come over.
Sure you would have. You'd comfort me, hold me, make me laugh, make me think I could take it, make me think I could take anything.
It was not in James Garner's character to start fights. In Hollywood, he was known for being level-headed and professional, and he was highly esteemed by nearly all of his collaborators. He was the type of performer who was punctual, script-savvy, and cordial with everyone he worked with, including the lighting technician and the director. Courteously and kindly. People should have paid attention when he expressed worry for someone, but they didn't. One actress, elegant, iconic, and a legend in her own right, was the subject of Garner's warnings. He made it plain behind closed doors that she bothered him in some way. People ignored him for a long time. She had already won over fans, the press, and the industry with her fearless performances, complex and tough to overlook. From the outside, she seemed to be the epitome of what Hollywood loved. James Garner, on the other hand, had caught a rarely glimpsed other part of her personality. Everything shifted, though, after it happened. Members of the crew, other directors, and other performers didn't start leaking their accounts until much later. Out of nowhere, Garner's subtle caution became more reasonable. It became more apparent that he had been correct the whole time. So, what was the exact nature of James Garner's relationship with this untouchable icon? For what reason did he feel compelled to speak out? Also, why was it that Hollywood was so slow to trust him? You have to know who she was to the world to grasp the surprise and ease with which people disregarded James Garner's warning. Actress Lauren Bacall was in a league of her own. Yes, she was a member of the Hollywood elite. Ever since her 1940s film debut, she rewrote the definition of cool, confident, and totally in charge with her deep, smoky voice and iconic arched eyebrows. To Have and Have Not, her debut film starring Humphrey Bogart, was the turning point in her career. Bacall went from emerging star to something more than that because to the intense connection they had off-screen as well as on. Glamour, strength, and mystique were all embodied by her. Her critics were spellbound by her. She was revered by studios and admired by fans. Bacall was remarkable for her independence, frankness, and wit in an industry that valued conformity and youth. She climbed the corporate ladder with an irresistible magnetism, becoming known as a strong, independent lady who seldom squandered her ambitions. She was described in interviews as refreshingly honest and incredibly brilliant. Her words were unfiltered, pushed the boundaries, and refused to be categorized as helpless victims or supporting characters. Many people looked up to her as a feminist icon long before the term became popular. However, rumors lurked beneath the surface of all that glitz and glamour, the kind that never made it into magazine, spreads, or television interviews. Her co-workers occasionally said that she was distant, domineering, and even condescending. You wouldn't see or hear it from her admirers during her concerts. A subtle, quiet, but true threat accompanied her name in intimate circles. But those rumblings were largely ignored when they came to light. Just because Lauren Bacall was Lauren Bacall. Being courageous and outspoken had been the foundation upon which her entire identity rested. Some found her self-assurance uplifting. However, it was something different totally to other people, including a highly famous actor. Plus, James Garner noticed a distinction. He sensed it. And when they collaborated, he couldn't contain his excitement. However, that was merely the first step. Both Lauren Bacall and James Garner were already household names when they were cast together in a single production. The Rockford Files solidified Garner's position, and his meteoric rise to stardom began with his easy charisma in Maverick. He was the popular guy because he was easygoing, peaceful, and had a dry sense of humor that could make even the most difficult people laugh. He had a reputation for being respectful to everyone he worked with, from directors to extras. In an egotistical town, Garner remained grounded. After that, in 1981, Garner played the role of Bacall's ex-husband in the psychological thriller The Fan, which starred Bacall as a Broadway star who was being pursued by an obsessed fan. Working with two seasoned pros should have been a breeze, but Garner could feel something off nearly the minute filming started. A red flag had gone up. Those in the know about the production say that the chemistry between them was calm. On the outside, everything appeared to be subtle, icy, and professional, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of conflict. For Garner, sets that seemed like families were the norm. Bacall introduced a new element. She had exacting standards and may be condescending towards anybody who fell short or who dared to question her authority. No one heard her yell. Her boundless enthusiasm, though, could terrify anyone in the room. Garner, on the other hand, avoided any attempts at dominance or trying to steal the spotlight from her. He did not like that. However, he was equally honest about when things weren't going well. Changing her strategy for the benefit of harmony didn't appear to be something Bacall was really interested in doing. It was her job to make sure everyone else was aware of her rank. Some team members started chatting behind closed doors. The director's authority was questioned, and Bacall was rumored to have rewritten lines while blocking. Although Garner was hesitant to cause a fuss, he was becoming more and more irritated by the situation. The work was suffering, not because he needed special treatment. In subsequent comments, he would allude to the unpleasantness of the situation without directly mentioning anyone. Those familiar with both him and the set, however, knew precisely to whom he was referring. Bacall's demeanor had an impact on other individuals associated with the production, not limited to him. What was the trigger for the heightened discomfort? The issue was unnoticed by Bacall. While she saw it as nothing more than being straightforward, professional, and efficient, Garner saw it as something else different. His career had exposed him to a wide range of personalities, including those who were outspoken, reserved, quirky, and stubborn. However, rather than confidence, he perceived control in Bacall. Unlike the kind that attracts admiration, instead, it turns people off. For the time being, Garner chose to keep quiet about most of it, but he had no intention of being silent indefinitely. It was never James Garner's style to publicly shame others. He was reserved, polite, and nearly gag-proof when it came to rumors. So, it was significant when he did mention someone, however informally. Years after they had worked together on The Fan, he spoke bluntly about Lauren Bacall when he did speak. There was no outright assault on Bacall in his autobiography, The Garner Files. He was not one to do that, but he did make it plain that they had had a challenging time together. He said she was guarded and abrasive, and that she had a nasty habit of looking down on people. Despite his reluctance to accuse her by name, it was clear that her actions had made an impression, and not a good one. According to his account, collaborating with her was as delicate as treading on eggshells. She was unyielding in her demands and unwilling to budge. Garner, who was all about teamwork and generosity, felt her attitude was exhausting. Not her attitude per se, but the ease with which others overlooked it was what irritated him the most. People paid less attention to what was actually transpiring in front of them because of her prestige, attractiveness, and long history. That was par for the course in Hollywood. Historically, prominent figures have often been pardoned for actions that the general public would never approve of, particularly when those involved enjoyed a golden age of fame and a legion of devoted followers. Neither headlines nor criticism followed Garner's comments. Actually, they were mostly ignored. In the end, Bacall was a living legend. She had married Humphrey Bogart, worked with A-listers, and built her career on risk-taking. With no remorse, it was commonly perceived as an indication of fragility or envy whenever someone bemoaned her. This was all Garner needed to prove. No, He was not resentful. He was not motivated by any particular purpose. All he was doing was being straightforward and honest, just as he always had been. Perhaps that's why it was so hard to notice. He wasn't leaking information to the media or yelling from the rooftops. He merely cautioned the individual ahead of him in a low voice that things would go more smoothly for them than they did for him. It became evident that Garner was not alone once the stories began to pile up, but unfortunately, few people took that warning seriously. The majority of viewers recall The Fan as an understated thriller that was chic, creepy, and carried off by Lauren Bacall's formidable performance. While the cameras were rolling, something lot less exciting was happening behind them, but no one witnessed the tension that was building up. Experienced actor James Garner rarely let his co-stars get the best of him. He had worked with Steve McQueen and Julie Andrews, among many others. However, he had to walk a tightrope when filming The Fan. Though he never came across as aggressive, Bacall managed to generate a tense mood that permeated the entire set. Instructions became commands, and conversations were snippeted, and her response was frequently cold and dismissive to anyone who tried to make thoughts or ideas, particularly if they dared to question her authority. In retrospect, crew members remarked on an inescapable dynamic. The energy of the production was under Bacall's control, and she was demanding control over her scenes as well. It was common for her to override decisions that she believed did not align with her vision, challenge directions, and resist rewrites. Garner, who placed a premium on efficiency and harmony, repressed his anger to a considerable degree. On the other hand, his brief comments and body language suggested otherwise. Supposedly, Bacall and the film's director, Edward Bianchi, had an argument at one point. No one ever said anything publicly, but rumors swirled that Bacall's stubbornness caused production delays and team strife. Maintaining objectivity was Garner's professional utmost priority. However, he clearly was not having fun. The fact that Bacall could toggle the charm like a switch added another layer of complexity. She looked self-assured and hilarious to the news crew. The staff and cast may perceive her as critical, domineering, and emotionally distant. Collaborating with that kind of person is like being in a frigid room where the temperature never rises or falls, according to Garner. It wasn't a violent brawl. The kind that gradually wears people down is the quiet kind. This was not one of those spectacular explosions that you would see in tabloids or on television. All it took to understand what was going on were little snubs, silences, and oblique remarks. And these were the kinds of conflicts that go unreported by the media, but are always felt by the people who were there. The ordeal taught Garner a valuable lesson. The most impactful battles are not often the most boisterous. People who are reserved tend to be they. Plus, he would learn later on that he wasn't the only one who had experienced that shiver. Not only did James Garner feel uneasy after seeing Lauren Bacall, but so did everyone else. Rumors that never made it into the press but were common in backstage areas, locker rooms, and private talks were subtly repeated by a number of performers and industry insiders throughout the years. In particular, the way Bacall dealt with other powerful characters stood out. Nobody could frighten her, and her intention was crystal evident. Some people appreciated her self-assurance, but others thought it was hostile. Bacall was notorious for challenging directors and getting into fights with co-stars who couldn't handle her energy on stage, especially during her time on Broadway. Theater insiders claim that on occasion, rehearsals became stressful, not due to lack of preparation or disagreements over ideas, but rather because Bacall was adamant about having the play run her way. It was so hot that even seasoned performers felt it. It was stated that an actor who had previously appeared in a revival with her left the production in the middle, claiming what is typically a cover for much deeper personal strife. Irreconcilable creative disagreements. Collaboration had become a battleground due to Bacall's craving for control, according to the rumors. Despite the lack of official confirmation, the episode bolstered the mystique around her mysterious identity behind the scenes. Brenda Vaccaro, an actress who was also involved in Bacall's inner circle, revealed in an interview that the actress could be difficult to satisfy when the focus was not on her. Despite her reluctance to use specific names, the circumstances clearly indicated who she was referring to. Collaborating with Bacall could be draining, even for those who secretly respected her skill. She was incredibly talented, according to an unnamed stage actor, but whenever she entered a room, it seemed as though the air itself was getting thinner. The issue of longtime friends who had become distant co-workers also arose. It wasn't scandal or treachery that caused some of Bacall's closest business connections to end. It was the emotional toll of remaining close that was too much. Although she might be loyal at times, she could also be quite controlling, demanding, and critical. She was the type of person who remembers every slight, no matter how tiny, according to an old acquaintance of hers, and keep them in your memory forever as well. Her interviews were no exception to her reserved attitude. Bacall frequently made reference to being truthful, although he did it selectively, telling a reporter that, a comment that revealed not only her viewpoint, but also her measurement of others, was one example of how fast she was to criticize others, particularly fellow actresses. As far as Bacall was concerned, one had to work their way up to respect. Not all of it was freely given, even back then. A more complete picture emerges when you compare these testimonies side by side, taking into consideration the on-stage tensions, broken friendships, and subtle remarks made by performers who had experienced it all. There were others besides Garner. Like many others, he had felt the chill of that icy front. The pattern was obvious, even though nobody said anything about it. The pattern would eventually overtake Bacall's renown, beyond the comprehension of her devoted followers. Something out of the ordinary started to happen to Lauren Bacall as time went on, and her profession came under less scrutiny. She had spent decades sculpting an image that was so carefully controlled that it began to crumble. As time passes, quietly and honestly, rather than in the midst of a scandal or media craze, memoirs began to flood the market, prompting a flood of revived interviews and introspection from industry stalwarts. It became more difficult to disregard the rumored facts concerning Bacall. Unexpectedly, James Garner's nudge that she wasn't as cooperative as her polished image implied started to hit home. Other members of the group started to open up in the years following the fan. Past directors who chose not to speak publicly about their experiences working with Bacall reminisced about the difficulties of dealing with her rigid personality and her habit of taking charge of every given production. Compromise was not in her lexicon, according to one director who characterized her as intelligent but unyielding. Her later interviews had a distinct tone, which even her supporters could tell. The more Bacall aged, the more caustic her remarks about Hollywood became. Even though she claimed to be one of the only remaining true actors, she was critical of contemporary stars and downplayed emerging talent. Some praised her independence, but others saw a stubbornness to change, and contempt for those who hadn't been around during her time. That was not all it appeared in. In her late career interviews and appearances at award shows, Bacall frequently gave the impression of being distant or uncaring, abruptly cutting presenters off mid-sentence or ignoring their queries. A sense of superiority has replaced what was formerly perceived as assurance. Additionally, it irritated some individuals. Her mystique subsided, revealing a more nuanced reality. After that, there came the post-event reviews. A more complex picture of Bacall evolved as cinema historians rethought the golden age of Hollywood. Naturally, her legacy lived on. There could have been no doubt about her skill, charisma, and impact. Something more nuanced, though, supplanted the idea of the unassailable Queen of Cool, a lady who may have lost the affection of those close to her after fighting fiercely for her position in the profession. No one ever heard James Garner brag. "I warned you so" was never his words. He did not like that. The puzzle pieces started to fall into place nevertheless for individuals who had deciphered his memoir's subtleties and recalled his caution. Long before anybody else had, he had noticed it. The subtle desire to exert control over every space she entered, the power dynamics, and the emotional distance. Against Bacall's soaring fiction, Garner's subdued reality stood firm in a place where reputations matter greatly. Because he stood to earn nothing by speaking it, it was all the more impactful. Neither vengeance nor publicity were his motivations. He couldn't deny that it had occurred. And now, looking back, everyone could understand the whole picture. James Garner, ultimately, refrained from causing a commotion. He refrained from attempting to discredit anyone, airing his frustrations on talk shows, or writing a dramatic exposé. He was not that person, but he also wouldn't put up an act. He had an encounter with Lauren Bacall, was left behind. Not because it was violent or horrible, but because it subtly revealed how much it hurts to collaborate with someone who prioritizes authority over rapport. The unsettling film set is only one part of Garner's experience. In Hollywood, the bigger picture is at stake. Reality is frequently hidden behind that facade, and legends aren't always as they appear. There was no one who dared to question Bacall's status as an unapologetic icon for decades. The fierceness, might, and rebellion that she exhibited were highly lauded. However, the fact that her blazing passion could also scorch those closest to her was frequently disregarded. There was no wickedness in her. She lacked malevolence. Unfortunately, she was a pain. And scars are sometimes the result of hard times. Garner noticed it. He sensed it. And he opted for candor instead of attacking. Subtle sincerity that, in the long run, was more impactful than any splashy headline. Perhaps it is just that quality that draws the reader in. The fact that a charming Hollywood star saw something that everyone else ignored was more important than the drama or stress. He didn't want to bring anyone down, so he whispered it instead. Someone had to say it, so he did.